Hi, this is John with Legislative Weekly, letting you know exactly what your government has been up to. It's been quite a week, with bills being introduced from both the House and the Senate side, so stay tuned and we'll get right to those updates. Starting off with some good news for unions, but bad news for employers. Bill C-420 was introduced last week in the House, and this bill will aim to put a stop to the controversial practice of replacement workers, also known as scabbing in some circles. If this bill passes, it will become an offense for an employer to hire a replacement worker during the duration of a strike, and that's from whether within the organization or outside of the organization. Now, there have been a few jurisdictions, including Quebec, which has already banned the practice of hiring replacement workers, and Canada already has a significant number of restrictions through our industrial relations laws. That being said, an outright ban is quite a large change in Canada's labor relations scheme, and from this point on, if this bill is to pass, the only options that employers will have during a strike is to continue trying to maintain operations using just the managerial staff, who are exempt from this restriction. Next up, we have Bill C-418, a newly introduced bill which is meant to offer some protection to healthcare workers in the context of assisted suicide. Assisted suicide was legalized relatively recently in 2016, and it hasn't been put to a huge amount of use. That being said, there are a lot of concerns about this very controversial issue. So it looks like this bill is an attempt to put in some safeguards. So the first, I think this is a step in the right direction in terms of regulating the assisted suicide scheme in Canada. Obviously, this is an incredibly controversial issue, and it's a very difficult thing for many in the healthcare profession to do. Generally, people go into the profession because they want to help people and save lives. So asking them to help put another person down is, gonna raise a lot of concerns. Talking to vets, one of the toughest parts of the job is when they have to put down an animal, and I can't imagine it being any easier in terms of humans. Now, there are some concerns that this will reduce the accessibility of assisted suicide in Canada if a whole bunch of healthcare professionals just say, hey, you know what, not gonna do it. Frankly, I don't think that's an issue. In order to go through with the process anyways, you do need the approval of a doctor in the first place. So, in terms of people who are seeking this procedure, I don't think it opposes a huge amount of barriers that, you didn't already have before. Applying for citizenship, living in Quebec, well, you'll probably need to brush up on your French. A new bill will require that all Quebec residents applying for Canadian citizenship must demonstrate a base level proficiency in the French language. I was a little surprised when I saw this bill because I thought there was already something like this in place. But apparently right now you are able to secure Canadian citizenship as long as you are able to demonstrate proficiency in English or French, even as a permanent resident in Quebec. This does seem to establish a little bit of a double standard. Someone who has no competency in English, but only competency in France will still be able to secure citizenship as a permanent resident in any of the English-speaking provinces. That being said, as a bilingual country with a large English majority and just one province where French is the main language, this is one of those cases where an exception should be made. After all, Quebec does have a right to maintain their own language, and this law could be a huge step in helping them do so. Over on the Senate side, we have a very interesting bill being introduced. This is Bill 256, which will oversee the development of a national framework for essential work skills. Now, this framework will include a number of things, such as a list of the essential work skills, current and future, that Canadians should be possessing, a target mark for each of these essential skills, and a timeline for meeting these targets. The reasoning behind this bill is that with the advent of a lot of new technologies, including artificial intelligence, there's going to be a lot of changes in the way that people work, and a list of new skills that people will need to possess. While I am appreciative of the mentality behind this, I'm a little bit skeptical as to how the government's actually going to pull it off. This is an absolutely enormous task. I'm really not sure how they're going to be pulling together these essential list of workplace skills and how they're going to set reasonable benchmarks and take steps to get us there. Taking into account how many different fields there are, all the different Canadians who are a part of this, a huge number of stakeholders, not just within Canada, but industries worldwide who could potentially have a say in how this is going to be developed. This task could be made a little easier by looking at other countries that have successfully implemented frameworks like this. I'm sure there are quite a few out there. That being said, there are many factors which are unique to Canada, which will still have to be taken into account. So it's still a very, very daunting task. Last but not least, we have Bill C-86. Now this is one of those what they call omnibus bills, where they pretty much cram in as much as they possibly can. So in terms of the sheer content, it is a lot. Now the big thing that this bill does is it will implement parts of the February 2018 budget released by the Liberal government. So as you can probably guess, yes, there is a lot of tax stuff in here. If you are interested in tax, I really recommend you take a look. The link is down in the video description below. So once again, this is John Wu with Legislative Weekly. Hope you enjoyed this week's update. If you would like to get more updates, please follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter at Codify Legal Publishing. We are posting legislative updates on the daily, and it's a great way to keep up with exactly what your government is doing. Thanks again for tuning in, and hope to see you again next week.